I run the business all year round, but on Thanksgiving, I go that little extra mile to just bring a bit of extra joy to my elderly and disabled clients. Now, there was this one old fellow that I used to visit, and he only had me booked in for Thanksgiving. He did fine most of the year, but he liked having a nice Thanksgiving meal prepared for him, and I think he liked the company too. He told me a number of times that he didn't have any family and it was just him. So Thanksgiving 2018, I turned up at his house with a special ham roast prepared for him with love. I looked forward to seeing this old fella. I was kind of excited for him to answer the door and see his usual beaming smile, his shiny white false teeth perched precariously in his mouth. No, I'm just trying to sound silly here, but I was a little surprised when a much younger guy answered the door. Now, I told him who I was, Meals on Wheels, and explained that I was here to see that old fella and cook for him. And the young guy looked confused for a second and then said, "Oh, damn. His grandfather was in the bathroom and must have gotten the timing wrong." And the guy invited me in and encouraged me to start preparing the food ready for the old guy to finish his bath, and that it'd be a nice treat when he got done bathing and realized that he had a Thanksgiving meal to look forward to. Now, the young relative ran upstairs very quickly, and I heard him calling through the bathroom door, telling his grandfather that the Meals on Wheels lady was there for him. And I couldn't hear the grandfather's response, of course, but why would I? Now, I went about warming up the food that I'd brought. Typically, we cook it in advance, and then it just needs heating up in the client's oven. And the process takes maybe 10 minutes, so I went to wander around the living room, which I'd been in many times. The grandson, who I'd imagine was probably in his mid-20s, was still upstairs, maybe getting his granddad out of the bathroom. Now, I started looking at some of the photos on the wall. They all just showed my elderly client at different stages in his life. However, I started to notice something odd. The young man who'd let me in didn't seem to appear in any of these photos. In fact, there was nothing that I could see that suggested that my client even had grandkids. And then I remembered. He told me previously that he didn't have any living family, so who the hell was this young guy who let me in? The old man was upstairs in the bathtub, so there was nothing suspicious, right? And then I realized I had absolutely no evidence that my client really was upstairs in the bathroom. All I'd heard was the young guy talking as if he was speaking to someone. It could have been completely fabricated for all I knew. I decided to play it safe and called upstairs that the food was almost ready and was my client nearly ready to come down. And the young guy shouted down, sounding almost annoyed, and that, yeah, they were coming. He was just helping Grandpa dress himself and various things. This was definitely suspicious. The old fella might have been a Meals on Wheels client, but he was healthy and fit enough not to need home help, and he certainly did not need help getting dressed after a bath. Still, though, it was possible that maybe he'd fallen and there was a reasonable explanation for this. Now, I turned the oven off and left the food in there and called upstairs that I was going to be going because I had other clients to see, so I left the food warming in the oven. I didn't receive a reply, so I decided that I'd just leave and then call in a wellness check once I was safely out of the house. However, as I tried to leave, I discovered that the front door was locked. Now, it was one of those types of doors with a deadbolt where you actually need a key to unlock it from the inside, and it had been locked with that deadbolt. Obviously, something was wrong here. I could hardly call the cops and say that I might have had been locked in an old guy's house by a suspicious character, so I just decided to try the back door. And that way, of course, was also deadbolted. I'd left my cell phone in the van, because typically we weren't supposed to bring devices into clients' homes, and so I headed into the living room to either use the landline or see if there was a window that I could open to escape from or something. Now, this fake grandson was standing there, wearing nothing but his tidy whities and a poop-eating grin on his face. He started on some rant about how a dried-up old hag like me would surely be flattered to sleep with him, and that he'd even pay me if I did certain things. Now, I was speechless, disgusted. I'm happily married, and even if I wasn't, my God. I told him as much and told him that if he didn't unlock the door right this minute, I'd call the cops. Now, he just sort of laughed at that as if that was somehow a complete impossibility. And still no idea to this day why he was so confident about that. So the fake grandson approaches me and says that if I won't take him up on his generous offer, then considering I'm technically a home invader, I'm unsure of what logic he was using to decide that he had no choice but to defend himself. I asked him what in God's name he was talking about, and he just looked me in the eye, point blank, and just said, "I'm going to touch you, and then depending on how I feel, I might just bury your body in the basement." Now, I could tell he was serious. I could also tell that he was seriously on something. Later, via the police report, I found out that he was on an absolutely ridiculous amount of cocaine, but at the moment all I knew was that there was no way that this pasty creep was going to get his hands on me. And from visiting my client every Thanksgiving, I knew the living room well. I knew that behind me there was a fireplace, and besides that, a set of tools for cleaning that said fireplace. A poker, a brush, and one of those long metal dustpans. And that's what I managed to grab when I reached behind me blindly, and that's when I swung forward, cracking my would-be assailant straight in the crotch. He howls, screams, and fell to the floor, and just for good measure, I brought that pan down again on him, the flat underside slamming into his clearly aroused groin. And I later found out that it's possible to break someone's you-know-what, and that's exactly what I think I did. Unfortunately, this is also why my attempted freak managed to get away with a suspended sentence, because I was forced to lower the charges to avoid him countersuing for some fairly serious bodily damage. But it felt pretty worth it regardless, and I'm pretty sure I dissuaded him from trying to touch anyone else in the future. Now, I found out that my client had unfortunately passed away the week before, and due to his lack of family, his Meals on Wheels order had yet to be canceled. The guy who attempted to trap me there was the new tenant, and apparently decided to celebrate his Thanksgiving by doing a truckload of drugs and trying to kidnap a Meals on Wheels worker. I don't know what became of him after the disappointingly short legal proceedings in which I had to back down from pushing too hard after I basically broke his wiener, but again, I think I did the world a favor.